Welcome to Drumbeats, the must-listen-to podcast which explains why Indigenous partnerships are the key to securing successful outcomes in natural resource and infrastructure investment in Canada. I'm Mark Magnacca, my co-host Robert Brant, and are joined today again by Bernd Christmas, KC, principal at the Bernd Christmas Law Group. The discussion today delves into the historical and legal significance of the Mi'kmaq Nation's treaty rights, particularly the 1725 Peace and Friendship Treaty with the British, which was one of those treaties that British soon regret signing. It laid the basis for a challenge over 250 years later called the Marshall Decision, where it reinforced the Mi'kmaq's right to fish commercially. The Supreme Court sided with the Mi'kmaq, leading to a 30-day moratorium on fishing and subsequent government recognition of their commercial fishing rights, changing fishing on the east coast of Canada. The conversation will also cover the Squamish Nation's $1.5 billion Sanok housing development in Vancouver, British Columbia. Can you just give some further background about the Mi'kmaq and the Supreme Court decision that you referred to? Because I think it is a very important decision in Canadian history. And I think our listeners would like to understand that, because that became a case for many in terms of relations.
Yeah. So what happened with our community, the Mi'kmaq Nation, which is our traditional territories in what's called Atlantic Canada, eastern part of Canada. There's Newfoundland, New Brunswick, Prince Edward Island, Nova Scotia, and the Gaspé Peninsula of Quebec, and then also into Maine, the state of Maine in the United States. The interesting background for the historical buffs is that obviously in the 1700s, you had the 100-Year War and all those things going on between France and Britain, and amongst other territories and skirmishes that they were dealing with. And then you had the United States, the beginning of the early colonists and the creating of those states in the early days of the United States, and how it then eventually became its own country. But during those days, the power between the British and the French in North America was determined mostly by being allied with my nation, the Mi'kmaq. And, we swayed the power each way. And the British, I'm speeding up history a little bit here. Eventually, the British and the Mi'kmaq signed some treaties. In fact, we signed a lot of treaties, but one in particular in the early 1700s. We signed where we said that we would be at peace and be friends and allies forevermore. And it was the only time the British ever did that. Historians might argue with me a little bit, but if you look at it from that perspective, the treaty-making process was the only time that the British said, okay, yeah, the Mi'kmaq are an equal. And they had no choice, because we were a major fighting force. And so we entered into this Peace and Friendship Treaty. And one of the benefits of that treaty was that they would open up a truck house or trading post or a store, I guess, in modern times, where the Mi'kmaq would come and bring their furs, their berries, their fish, their meat, and the British would have to buy it. And we thought that was a good deal, keeping us happy. I always think about my ancestors, say, wow, what a deal they struck. However, the British didn't think it was a good deal, because I think they called them the Lords of Trade in England. I guess the King's man said, "Yeah, this is costing us way too much money. yeah, we really got taken on that one because there was no choice. They had to buy. They had to buy at a certain price. And we did research on that because concurrently to that, Donald Marshall Jr., one of our community members, his father was once the Grand Chief of the Mi'kmaq Nation, our traditional government. And, obviously his dad is telling him, we have these rights, this, we're equal. They shouldn't be doing all these things to our people. And so Donald Marshall Jr., he said he always remembered that and kept telling Chief Terry Paul, we got to do something about this, got to do something about this. And for those also, just as a quick background, Donald Marshall Jr. is also a man that was wrongfully convicted for a crime, in this case, a murder that he did not commit, and was eventually exonerated, fully pardoned, and apologized, and received some money for that as well, for that wrongful conviction, after spending roughly 11 years in jail. And he always held to the point that he was innocent. And eventually they turned out that the whole system, the justice system, not only in Nova Scotia, but Canada, was against the Mi'kmaq. And there was a royal commission that was started, and a big report was done, and people can read up on this and about him in particular. But again, on this case, in essence, the Lords of Trade in England decided it was way too much money to keep this truck house going. And Donald Marshall Jr. at the same time was saying, we got to do something. We have the right to fish. And so Donald Marshall Jr. went out and said, I'm doing this. And he was encouraged, obviously, by Chief Terry Paul as his chief, and said, we got your back. And he went out and caught some eels. And so the first day, and we told the enforcement folks, in this case, Natural Resources / Fisheries and Oceans Canada, that we're going to go fishing. And he went down to the harbor and went and caught some eels. And the enforcement guys came and kind of looked at what he was doing, but didn't do anything about it. They said, okay. And then he said, well, I'm going to be back tomorrow. I said, okay, we'll be here too. And then he went and did his thing, did another few hours, and they're watching him. And then the third day, they said, okay, clearly they got instructions. Arrest them, charge them. And then right from that point, that's where the case started. We basically said, we have the right to commercial fish pursuant to treaty. And we used that truck house clause in the treaty to say, you recognized that we commercially fished. You wouldn't have bought it from us, hunt and fish and collect berries and other flora in the area and brought it to you, and you bought it. So you recognized implicitly that we had commercial operations going on at that time, back in the early 1700s. And so we went all the way to the Supreme Court of Canada, and ultimately the Supreme Court sided with us. And that was something. I still remember that day vividly when the case came down. There was a big press conference. You probably could look that up and see up to how we dealt with that. And it was one of those situations that it was where we said, okay, let's not rub it in the face. We realize this is a big, massive opportunity. We're not ready to undertake it. And so let's go and say, okay, we'll work with government to get this situation underhand. And there were so many things happening at the same time. You had the fisheries organizations going crazy. Department of Fisheries and Oceans Canada couldn't believe it. But we coalesced the 36 First Nations at the time to say, okay, let's work together. And in fact, actually, we sent out an olive branch and said we would do a 30-day moratorium. Don't go out fishing until government can get caught up to speed. And sure enough, that was greatly appreciated. In fact, circling back, the Prime Minister was Jean Chrétien at the time, and he, I remember talking to him a few times about it, and he said, "We really appreciate you doing this, and we'll all work it out. And what we'll do is get your capacity built up and make this all go according to the law of the land, which was the recognition of your commercial fishing rights." And then that's what started the whole acquisition of quotas and purchasing of quotas for the Mi'kmaq people, also fleets of ships, and all the attachments that go with fishing in the North Atlantic. And then ultimately, from the member two perspective, that led us to start the journey, which ultimately culminated with the purchase of Clearwater Fisheries, which I'm sure Chief Terry Paul talked to you extensively about, for over $1 billion a few years back.
Yes.
So
Wow.
that case was very important to us at the time.
Country changing, game changing, and all kinds of lessons to that and learnings. First of all, everybody loves conspiracies. Who was in charge of the enforcement officers? Was an Indigenous person to say, okay, now go do it. Let's see what happens.
Yeah.
I'm joking.
I know. Well, we don't know. Like, I
No, of course not.
me will never remember their names anyway. It's not that I mean that in a disrespectful way. It's just that those guys at the time were probably doing their job, right? Yeah.
Yes.
Go charge those crazy guys. And then it culminated domino effect, which they probably are happy to say, well, I was involved. I was the guy that charged.
I'm sure they are today. And I think the other thing is, when you talked about the 36 communities, you got them working together. I mean, that probably was an exceptional moment, because it's tough to get independent communities and each with their own chiefs. Okay, here's how we're going to play it. And then to say, okay, and we're going to have a 30-day moratorium.
Yeah, that was something there, because we did it. I say we because I work closely with a good friend and colleague of mine, Dan Christmas, who eventually became a senator in the Senate of Canada. And he and I both worked very diligently to make this happen. And of course, Chief Terry Paul working behind the scenes, with his special expertise to make sure the chiefs eventually came on side. You have to remember, we're different provinces, different territories of the Mi'kmaq Nation, slight little variances, but we pulled it off. And even the government people, I've had conversations with government people, even most recently, that remember all that. And people that worked in the minister's office and both the prime minister's office said, we couldn't believe, A, that we lost because we were being told by justice people that this case is in the bag, but B, how you guys coordinated all that and still had us on our toes, because, obviously government always thinks they're in charge. And, but it was a fun time, Mark. It was very interesting. It was, I think the one point that made it really special, and it's something I deal with in other parts of the country when I'm dealing with groups of First Nations trying to collaborate, or a nation in itself that has very different communities, is that I always try to focus on one particular, we'll call it motherhood issue, that they all can say, yeah, this is why we're doing this. And that seems to work. You're not trying to, scam them, so to speak. You're trying to get them to work collectively. And I always use this one particular motherhood issue that will bring them all together and then keep them focused.
That's how Chief Terry Paul got you home.
Yeah.
Feel to your heart, right?
Yeah.
The Sinnock development in Vancouver is really interesting. Why don't you talk a little bit about where you were there day one? It's almost ready for first tenants, I think, early next year. Tell us a little bit about the vision and how that evolved.
Yeah. So the Sinnock deal is the brainchild of quite a few of the politicians of the Squamish Nation, a lot of traditional chiefs and current leadership that had seen this idea blossom with some developers. And I was brought on to, initially I was brought on as a member of the board of directors of Henshkai, which is the business arm of the Squamish Nation. And then they asked me then to eventually become the CEO based on, my past experiences and the things that I'd done. And so, as I already mentioned early on, we had some other projects on the go, the LNG facility, wood fiber with the Singaporean interests. And then we had our forestry operations that we're trying to get rolling. And then we're starting some fishing operations. But real estate is a big thing for the Squamish Nation because they're in the heart of the hottest real estate market in Canada, at least. Vancouver, that whole region known as the mainland of British Columbia. And they had this idea to build, get into the marketplace with a property around 10 acres in downtown Vancouver, which again has same kind of similar history to, a lot of nations across the country could say the same thing where their land was taken. It was just, someone just decided, I'm taking that. Nothing you could do. And they couldn't do anything because they didn't, as you pointed out rightly, didn't have legal representation, and you couldn't represent a First Nation in fighting government or police or anything like that in the early days of this country. So they went to a court way before my time and re-garnered this piece of property, a very prime spot, and near the Kitsilano area of Vancouver. For those who aren't familiar with that, it's a very posh area, very posh. And they said, well, this is our Indian reserve and we're building. You guys built and we're building. So they decided to do this project with a developer and called West Bank. And we started the project with them. And, again, it was it's a well over, I think, again, around the 1.2 to 1.5 billion dollars that that Squamish has invested into this. And part of the rationale for building it was to create affordable housing also for its community members. A lot of people don't know that because it's not really focused on in the press. But it was to create affordable housing. Vancouver, I'm sure, is just like London.
Crazy.
The prices for rental properties, or like in London or New York, are astronomical. Well, guess what? It's like that in Vancouver too. And a lot of community members aren't in that bracket, that pay grade that they can afford, $2,000, $3,000, $4,000, rent for a small little space.
Even if it's Canadian, it's still a lot.
It's still a lot, yeah. So we said, okay, part of the deal is you got to give us X number of units that are just going to be for community members to have, whether it's purchased through the Squamish Nation or the community member is able to raise the funds or get a financing to do a traditional type mortgage, but it was at an affordable price. So that's how that came about, and that's why I almost suspect probably the nation itself agreed to say, yeah, let's build this thing, but you got to have these units for us. So
yes. And when's that coming on stream, or have some of those apartments been released now?
Well, it started. Construction started about a year and a half ago, a year ago. And it's, if you come to Canada, come to Vancouver, it's off the Burrard Street Bridge and near a famous tourist spot called Granville Island, and you can see it there.
I've seen pictures of it. Wow, yeah. What a great location. right? So I don't know about the existing residents, but the new ones will be very, very happy with the ability to participate that. And another interesting story, just one question before we wrap up and talk about some of your learnings and insights for foreign investors. How does the Indigenous experience differ, First Nations on Turtle Island, north of the border and south? Because Indigenous nations in Canada, the First Nations, the Indigenous peoples, are now recognized as the foundation for the country, and the country will not succeed unless the First Nations succeed, without a doubt. There'll be arguments along the way, and we can talk about Building Canada Act and all that, but it's not going to happen. In south of the border, it's completely different. There must be some First Nations thinking, jeepers, we never looked north and thought they had better opportunities. Do you have a view? Can you share some perspective on that?
Yeah.
Because I don't know enough that's just from my perspective looking in.
Yeah, so I would, the first thing I got to say is that we're attuned to the fact that our rights are ingrained in the Constitution of the country. So no government, no business can affect those things. They could try putting little limits on it, but they can't affect those rights that have been ingrained in the Constitution. So that's probably the biggest thing that people should be aware of. And then combine that most recently with the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, which has been adopted by Canada, and a slight version of that has been adopted by Canada. So it's making it even more relevant. And so someone asked me this question just the other day, and I think it's appropriate. They said, well, why aren't, Canada passed this legislation, try to speed up projects because of the current situation with the United States and, global marketplace. So Canada, in the wisdom from the Prime Minister's and his government, said, okay, we're going to pass this thing called Bill C5, and it's supposed to fast track a lot of infrastructure projects, big major projects. Some of the ones that I alluded to, Port Churchill, nuclear development, LNG development, and a whole host of other sort of a big housing initiative across the country, amongst others. But they had always said, well, the issue is that the regulatory red tape slows it all down. So the notion was to pass this legislation to speed up the process, to fast track everything. But unfortunately, I think what they forgot was that, the Canadian Constitution says Aboriginal rights have to be respected and maintained and can't be affected. And so at one point, they're trying to say, well, we'll consult with you later. Yeah, I have a feeling that's going to be tested. And in fact, I know it's going to be tested. There's cases that, I already know some communities that are saying, okay, well, we'll see how this goes. And, I'm pretty confident the Supreme Court is going to put a little damper on that Bill 5 as it affects Aboriginal rights. So I don't think they really meant to do that, but indirectly it's happened, and it's caused a big stir here in the country. But another part, just also flipping it, it's not just that we're getting irritated that our rights are trying to be trampled on again. I don't think that's it. There's a whole bunch of other things that are at play here. We got in Canada has a huge environmental movement that affects a lot of projects, but they can't do anything because again, they don't have those constitutional protections. So you don't hear them talking about this in a very meaningful way. But however, they are turning towards the Indigenous community to say, you got to help us. You're the only saving grace here that can help stop some of the craziness that is being brought out in legislation. And in the province of Ontario, they did the same thing. And they're also starting to realize, yeah, geez, I think we might have made a mistake with the Indigenous groups, because in Canada, the way the legal system is, the province can, in a limited way, get involved in a federal matter. What I would refer to that is Indigenous communities generally, in a weird way, is a federal jurisdiction, but they can't alter those rights. And so I think they got themselves caught, and time will tell how that works out. So for the audience in other places other than Canada, if you're wanting to come, don't. I think you should still come here, and if by some amazing chance you are working with an Indigenous community, I think it's even better for you, because of the fact that we have these abilities to push certain levers and buttons that a traditional partnership in the marketplace that you may be considering may not have. And everyone's looking for the opportunities to move shareholder value, and in the sense of the Indigenous potential partner or other structure that you're looking at. I can tell you right now, we're looking for deals for own source revenues to uplift our shareholders / the community members, bring up our standard of living, and do all those great things that people get into business for. And then also I think that's the kind of key point that people kind of have to remember. It is an interesting time right now, a very interesting time from a business perspective, the legal perspective, the moral perspective. The financial institutions in this country, we have some people call it a monopoly. You have 5 major banks. There, in fact, are 30 something banks in this country, but the 5 major ones kind of control what goes on. But even they are having difficulty with some of these financings, unless the First Nation is involved in the project.
Well, I think a couple of things. Canada's always dependent on foreign capital. And if you want to succeed in Canada, it's in partnership with the Indigenous peoples of Canada now. And that's the way to succeed. And when you talk about your experience and career and everything that's happened, is Indigenous people are pro-development. They just don't want to be left behind or tread over with no input into how it happens. Because there's great business stories.
Yeah, exactly. It's not the situation where we're trying to stop things. Oh my gosh, no. I can tell you that right now. The theory is that we are looking to do exactly what other peoples in a capitalist oriented marketplace want to do. We want to buy cars, we want to buy TVs, we want to buy groceries, we want to buy nice clothes, we want to raise our children, have a great education system, a social safety net. We like to do all those too, but you have to do it with hard-earned money, revenue systems. So why not allow us to be a part of that? And in the past, and to some point now, if you're going to not do that with us, and it's on our territories, yeah, you're going to get people saying, "Well, let's duke it out." And now that the treasuries are being built up in a lot of the communities across the country, the fight is on. It would be on. But I think it makes more business sense to say, well, let's kind of work something out. And you're not looking for people trying to, destroy your business plan or destroy your ultimate, shareholder value. And it's all within reason. You got to give some peace. Like when you come to Canada right now, the provinces, the provincial governments, the federal government, they ask for taxes. That's a source of revenue for them. First Nations are not taxing you, so to speak, but they're asking for a piece of revenue.
Right.
So that's what we're talking about. We're not, trying to take everything that's been hard earned and created by the company that's coming into the marketplace.
Bernd, I'd love to keep talking on and on and on. You've touched on great modern history of the country, current history of the country, and you talk about Missioner of the law firm, and Governor General at one point, Shoal Lake in Manitoba. I'm born in Brandon. That name's very familiar, and of course the case itself. And so it has been wonderful to have you on our podcast, Bernd. Rob and I really appreciate all the experience you've shared, and our audience will benefit from all those stories you've told. So thank you very much, Bernd. It's been a pleasure.
Well, Bernd, it's been great talking to you. Thanks again for taking the time. I look forward to seeing you soon. But in the meantime, Nyawan Goa.
Well, I really appreciate it. Thank you for inviting me to the program. And, it's a much needed, because, the voice of Indigenous peoples has to be out there. And you've always had amazing guests and leaders that are well beyond me, that are doing some amazing things. I think people really appreciate what you guys are doing.
Thank you to Bernd Christmas for sharing his insights with us, and thank you for viewing and listening. Mark your calendars for the upcoming 2026 summit taking place on the 8th of April. Be sure to share, subscribe, and leave a review on your favorite podcast channel. Thanks for listening to Drumbeats. Until next time.